Hey everybody, I know it's been a long time since I made a video. Believe it or not, these take 15 hours to make. So I burnt myself out on the initial videos I made, but now I'm gonna do them more over time and, just let it come over time instead of trying to burn myself out. But I do appreciate everybody that's followed me up to this point and that's stuck around for the ride. I definitely have a new one here. I wrote this in the last few days and I really hope you enjoy it. Ryan was an ordinary young man. His high school sweetheart Jessica always at his side. In his early 20s, he already owns his own home. Last week he proposed to Jess and she immediately said yes. The pair had a set of best friends they had known since high school, Shay and Blake. Blake was the jock while Shay was the cheerleader. They always met up on Saturdays to get a few drinks in an attempt to not lose their friendship, as most high school friendships die. This Saturday was special because as kids they would always trick-or-treat together on Halloween, and it was in fact the 31st of October. Shay would always text Jess about Blake taking forever to get ready, but today there was no messages. In fact, Jess hadn't gotten a response hours prior to the meetup. Since Ryan and Jess met with them ritualistically, they assumed that they would show, and if not, they could at least spend some time with each other. Jess was getting ready in the shower while Ryan got his Sunday best on. Ryan called to the bathroom, "Hey, hurry up in there, we're gonna be late." To which Jess grunted. Ryan went downstairs to make sure that he has wallet and keys. While grabbing them from the dish on the dining room table, he heard a loud scream and a thud coming from the upstairs shower. Without thinking, Ryan sprung into action. He bolted up the stairs, screaming Jess's name to no response. The shower was off at this point. As Ryan flung open the door, he looked to the right, and he saw Jess laying on the shower floor, unconscious. He ran to her, and as he reached their body, the door slammed behind him. Startled, he quickly turned around. A tall figure with a mask on was behind the door when he entered the room. The mask looked like a deformed face. He recognized the face. It was that of his father. Before he could even react, the figure pounced on Ryan and injected him in the neck with a syringe. Ryan tried to fight off the attack, but very quickly he felt his body numb and his consciousness fade. Ryan woke up in a dark room. Dazed for a few moments, he tried to look around. When he attempted to move, he felt his hands and feet were bound to a chair. In a panic, he remembered what had happened before he woke up. He screamed, "What's going on? Where's Jess?" After a few moments of silence around him, and Ryan frantically trying to get out of his shackles, a light turned on to the left of him, and then front left, then front right, then to his right. Ryan knew where he was. This was the old house of horrors he had gone to as a teenager. It had been shut down for years. To his left was the claustrophobia cave, front left the pits of hell, front right the house of mirrors, and to his right was where he fell in love with Jess in the Hall of the Dead. All those years ago, when Jess had gotten afraid, she had jumped back into Ryan, both of them tumbling. They both laughed. This is where their love blossomed. "What the fuck is going on?" Ryan bellowed out. There was a huge screen in the center of the room that turned on. On it was the very man that was in his bathroom, wearing the mask of his father's distorted face. "Hello, Ryan," a dark voice emitted from the screen. It sounded like a voice changer was in use. "Who are you? Why do you have that mask?" Ryan immediately felt a surge of electricity emanate through his shackles. The voice bellowed out, "Silence! In due time. You lived your life by your rules, and now you will follow mine." Ryan replied, "Who are—" He immediately felt the same surge of electricity course through his body. The man on the screen yelled, "One more time and I leave it running." Stunned and out of breath, Ryan bit his tongue. The man on the screen continued, "This is my realm. Here you will play by my rules." To the far left he saw a screen above the claustrophobia cave. On the screen was Blake. At the top of the screen was what looked like a digital timer, stuck on 15 minutes. The voice continued, "You take from the world around you. Now your world will be taken from you. But I am not without honor. I will give you a chance to overcome your circumstances. You have a button on the ground to press, but be aware that once you press that, the timer starts." Ryan looked closer at Blake on the screen. He was blindfolded. He was near the end of the cave, where he would exit to the main lobby. He was bound and gagged, but Ryan could see him trying to move. The voice continued, "Once that timer starts, Blake's time starts running out. You are to free him before the timer hits 0, or—" Blake feels what it really is to be in a small space. Ryan couldn't help it but scream out, "Why are you doing this?" "In due time," the man replied. "Try and run and Blake's fate will come much sooner. When you're ready, make your move." Ryan was panicking but remembered what his dad had taught him when he was a child. Take deep breaths and clear your mind. After calming himself a bit, Ryan started remembering being in the cave as a child. It was a dark corridor where the walls went in and out while he walked through it. He had been in there so many times that he could map out his moves before starting. Once he felt he had fully mapped it out, he felt around with his feet until he felt the button. He then proceeded to press it down. Immediately, his shackles came off. He looked behind him to the main doors. They were all boarded up. Kids used to break in all the time since the place closed down. So eventually the bank put up metal barriers to keep intruders out. Ryan then heard the timer start on the screen Blake was on. He then heard loud churning of gears. He looked at the screen and saw the walls around Blake were slowly panning into the camera frame. What the fuck? Ryan whispered to himself. Now that he was free, he felt something on his neck. There was a collar around it with a red light emanating from it. The voice started up again. Ah, yes, I forgot to mention. If you don't enter the rooms, you will be blown to bits. Off with your head, as they say. The voice cackled wildly, then through its laughter said, 14 minutes left, I would hurry if I were you. Ryan bolted towards the entrance to the cave. Upon entry, the door slammed behind him, and he could hear what must have been automated locks activate. Ryan, in a state of panic again, calmed himself. He tried to remember the path, and put his hand to the right where the walls should be, but it wasn't there. Ryan figured if this man went to the trouble to rig all of this, he probably moved things around. Ryan felt out in front of himself and found a wall. He knew for certain he must go left. That's towards the exit. After a few feet, he felt a sharp pain in his hand. He winced. He could feel blood dripping from his hand. This lunatic must have put traps all through this place, he thought. Ryan was now panicking. He couldn't see, and his only way out of there was to feel around. 10 minutes, an automated voice bellowed out from the timer. Ryan knew that he had no choice but to keep moving. He figured since the left made sense, right would have been the move of a madman. He proceeded to the right and found himself in a narrow passage. He figured his best bet was to venture through and hope for the best. On his way through the tight squeeze, he heard a noise coming through the floor, a mechanical thumping. He attempted to listen to the rhythm and locations of these various thumps. 5 minutes, the timer stated. Ryan knew he needed to hurry, but he also knew being fast could be his death. Ryan did his best to step over the loud thumps. After successfully making it past a few thumps, he felt the walls get tighter. He turned his body sideways and kept trudging through the dark, tight corridor. He suddenly felt an intense pain on his back. The walls around him were sharp, with blades running across it horizontally. He yelled in pain. The timer bellowed out, 1 minute. In a rush, Ryan pushed through the pain, slicing himself up in the process. He could then see light emanating from the exit room. In a hurry, he ran towards the door. Then he felt a pressure on his leg. It had been a tripwire. A knife shot out of the floor and went straight through Ryan's right foot. He screamed in pain, but knowing the consequences of staying, he quickly hobbled to the exit room. As he entered, he heard beeping, and the voice of the man stayed so close. Ryan looked at the floor. Blake was shrieking, however it was muffled by the gag. The walls were pushing on his body now. Ryan could hear his bones cracking, see his skin splitting. He ran over and tried to pry the walls apart, but there was no hope. The walls continued moving, and soon, Blake's bellows were replaced with gurgling noises and loud snaps and cracks. Before long, Ryan watched the walls close entirely, blood spurting in every direction. After the walls touched, they quickly retracted. Ryan was in a state of shock. In front of him was a floor covered in every bodily fluid imaginable. He was covered in it as well. The man yelled out in a demonic voice, "Get out here now!" Ryan then heard the walls around him closing and saw the ones Blake was just crushed by closing too. Ryan bolted through the exit, forgetting about his pain momentarily. Upon exiting the cave, he heard the walls slam shut. Ryan's heart was racing. He could barely catch his breath. The main screen turned back on. The man wearing the mask of his distorted father's face was standing there laughing. "You were so close, Ryan. Better luck next time. You sick fuck," Ryan bellowed out. The man on the screen quickly replied, "You hold your tongue. You seem to forget that I have your life in my hands." Speaking of which, the man on the screen looked to his right, Ryan's left. The monitor above the pits of hell lit up. On it was Shay. She was screaming, hanging above a large vat, hands and feet bound. "As you can imagine, that's not a bath," the masked man stated. "That's piranha solution, a mixture of sulfuric acid and hydrogen peroxide. It can eat through anything. Quite a sight to see, really." Ryan started sobbing. Between the gouges on his hand and his back and the throbbing pain in his foot, he was feeling defeated. "Oh, come on now, Ryan. Never took you for such a bitch." 15 minutes goes on the clock. The man with the mask spun around theatrically and pointed to the pits of hell. "You have 5 minutes to enter that room," or the masked man held up a remote and stated, "Boom." With that, the TV shut off. Ryan was freaking out, but he knew his best bet was to quickly lick his wounds and proceed. He tore off his shirt, ripping off his sleeve and tying it around his hand. Then he proceeded to take the other sleeve and fasten it tightly around his foot. He then quickly stepped into the pits of hell. Upon entry, it was as he remembered. A cheesy demon sitting at the doorway stated, "Enjoy your stay, it's forever." Ryan felt like laughing, but granted the circumstances, that quickly faded. Red stalagmites hang from the ceiling and the floor looked wet. Ryan started bounding towards the next part of the room. Inside of it was a wheel of torture. Come on, see the act of the century. Our very own Ryan will be our contestant. Ryan heard the wall in front of him shift. The man with the mask was there. Ryan started charging at the man. The masked man immediately held up a remote and stated, "Remember what is at stake here, buddy." Ryan stopped in his tracks, furious but reserved. "I'll kill you," Ryan stated. "In due time. First go over to that wheel there and close your eyes." Ryan was about to argue, but then he heard the timer state 10 minutes. The masked man continued, "Don't move a muscle or I'll blow you up." Ryan didn't dare move. The masked man proceeded to bind his hands and legs to the wheel, and then he blindfolded Ryan. Ryan could feel the man place a remote in his hand. That remote is to the pitching machine on the other side of the room. You must press it 5 times. However, each time you press it, a knife will be cast in your direction. Remember, you must act fast or lights out. With that, the wheel started to spin. Ryan was disoriented, but he knew that he had no choice but to try and save Shay. If he didn't try, he was dead anyways. He pressed the button. A knife came whizzing through the room. He heard a loud thud next to his head, and with a sigh of relief, he then heard the timer. 5 minutes left. Ryan quickly pressed the button again. This time he was not so lucky. He felt a pain on the side of his abdomen. "Ouch," stated the masked man as he laughed. Ryan pressed the button again. A knife landed right next to his thigh. 2 more to go. Let's give it up for our contestant," said the masked man. Ryan pressed the button 1 more time. Ryan thought he was in the clear, but the splitting pain seared through his arm. The knife had pierced through his left forearm. Ryan screamed out in pain, almost dropping the remote. He proceeded to press it 1 last time. This last knife landed on his right hand, cutting his ring finger clear off. In shock, Ryan heard the timer state 1 minute. "Let me out," Ryan managed to whimper. The wheel stopped spinning and the shackles had fallen off. Ryan started falling, but was stopped due to the knife in his forearm. He screamed in pain as the knife continued to cut further up his arm. He quickly took off his blindfold and with his right hand, which luckily enough was only missing a finger, tore the knife out of the wall and fell to the floor. Luckily, the chest wound was only on his side. If the knife was 1 inch over, it would have been inside of him. He looked around to see if the masked man was there, but he must have left during the hysteria. Ryan, on pure adrenaline, ran towards the exit. He saw Shay inches away from the acid. To his right was a glass box, with multiple blades pointing away from the opening. In the center was a switch. Ryan quickly put his left hand into the glass box. He figured that the blood loss from his forearm might dull the pain. The blades were fashioned so that they were all pointing towards the switch. Ryan could push through, getting cut deeper as he went. Without thinking, he started pushing his hand into the blades. He screamed almost as loud as Shay, whose best attempts to raise her feet out of the acid was failing. The acid bubbled and started turning black. Shay's time was fading. Ryan shoved his hand further into the box and hit the switch. By now, most of Shay's lower half was in the solution. She was convulsing at this point. "Let her go, Ryan. You're prolonging her pain," the masked man said as he cackled. Ryan started crying. Seeing Shay like this broke him. He turned the switch back on, and within seconds, Shay was gone. The solution kept bubbling and eventually turned back to more clear color. No sign of Shay was left. Ryan stood there not knowing what to do. Now his mangled hand was past the knives, each knife's tip protruding into his wrist. "You have 1 minute before I come in there and throw you in that acid myself, Ryan," said the masked man. Ryan panicked. He didn't know what to do but pull. He managed to pivot his feet and got ready to pull as hard as he could. He knew if it wasn't hard enough, the combined friction of the many blades would stop him halfway. He yanked on his arm, tearing his hand to shreds. He passed out from the pure agony he was in. Ryan woke up surrounded by mirrors. His right finger had been bandaged, and his left forearm and mangled hand was bandaged as well. He was in the chair again, bound and unable to move. A phone was sitting on the floor in front of him. The screen lit up. On it was the masked man. "We've been through a lot, Ryan, more than you know." Ryan's mind raced. Did this person know him? This is a room of reflection. It's easy to look at other people for your problems, but looking at oneself will always yield fault. Ryan was stunned. His father would always say that. "Who are you?" Ryan lightly stated. "Make it out of here and you'll be 1 step closer to the answers you seek. This room is for your own self-reflection." The masked man then chuckled to himself. "Where's Jess?" Ryan screamed. "You will be reacquainted with her soon. Just like before, the button is on the floor. Release your shackles and claim your freedom." The phone shut off, and Ryan knew if he didn't move, he was dead. He quickly looked around and noticed that this wasn't the room he remembered. The mirrors were everywhere and seemed endless. Ryan hit the button and stood up quickly after the shackles had released. Ryan started feeling around the walls to try and find the way out. As he did, the first mirror he touched shattered immediately, raining glass all over him. Behind it was a dark wall. The masked man's voice bellowed out from the lobby. "You think I would let you get away with that? Touch the walls and they will shatter. Shatter 5 walls and boom." Ryan was freaking out, but he knew he had to use this to his advantage. Breaking mirrors could help him find the way out. It would create gaps in the image. He quickly turned around and found the path to the next section of the hall. Ryan entered the room and then proceeded to run straight into a mirror. Glass fell down as Ryan covered his head. "2 down," he heard the voice state. Not soon after, the timer stated 10 minutes left. Ryan proceeded to try and gauge the next segment and took a few pieces of glass off the floor. He slit his arm and drew blood to cover the shards. He used them as breadcrumbs to let himself know where he came from. He continued forwards, finding the next segment of the hall. 5 minutes, the timer stated. Ryan frantically ran forwards and broke another mirror. "That's 3, the voice stated. Ryan quickly got on his feet and continued. He could see the exit, but needed to find the right opening. While turning around, Ryan brushed up against another panel. It too shattered. "Oh no, that's 4. Watch out. Last chance." Ryan had a total of 6 mirrors around him. 2 were broken and 1 had a bloody shard near it. His chances were 33%. 1 was the exit and 2 were false. 1 minute, the timer stated. Ryan was freaking out, but he knew he had to choose quick. He lunged towards the middle path and burst through the exit doors to the lobby. To the left was the last room, the Hall of the Dead, and he knew Jess must have been in there. The screen kicked on, but what he saw was unthinkable. Jess was pinned to the wall. A massive saw was protruding through the wall next to her. But on the other side of the room there was another person. Against the wall was his mother, in an identical trap to the one Jess was in. "Why are you doing this?" Ryan screamed. Now, said the masked man. "We know how this works. 15 minutes on the board. I'll give you 5 minutes to enter, Ryan. We can't hold up the line." Ryan tried to make sense of this. How was he to save them both? Why was his mother here? Why were any of them here? Ryan knew that this questioning would get him nowhere, and he knew he had to hurry. He pushed past the doors into the Hall of the Dead, hearing them locked behind him. Upon entry, he saw that most things were as they were. However, where all of the animatronics and employees used to be was now covered in entrails and blood. Ryan held back his vomit and proceeded forwards. Getting to the second segment of the halls, he saw the section where the chainsaw-yielding man used to stand. That scared him and Jess all those years ago. Ryan whispered, "This is where..." He was cut off by the masked man. "You and her fell in love. It's funny how this is where it ends too." Ryan screamed, "I'll end you." "Calm down now, slugger." Ryan's father would always call him that. How did this guy know so much about his life? Why did he target him so intensely? Ryan then heard a trap door open from the ceiling where the chainsaw-wielding man used to stand. Out fell a decrepit corpse. The body was decayed. All of its fingers were missing and the face looked the most decayed. Nothing but bone was showing. Ryan almost threw up from the stench. 10 minutes, the timer stated. Ryan knew he needed to hurry. He was expecting some traps, but it seemed not much had been done to this place. Almost at the final room, he looked down and he saw Shay and Blake's wedding rings covered in what he now assumed was Blake's guts. He picked them up and carried on. The final segment of the Hall of the Dead was a white-tiled room. It used to be a fake surgical room where zombies would break out of their bindings and attack the doctors who were experimenting on them, and then they would all chase you out of the hall. But the room was bare. That is, except for Jess and his mother. 5 minutes left, the timer stated. Ryan saw they were both gagged and quickly ran over and took the tape off of their mouths, starting with his mother. She started crying, questioning what was going on. He then ran over to Jess and did the same. She was equally as incoherent and frantic. The voice bellowed out with the same demonic tone, much louder than before. "Silence!" The room came to a hush, minus the 2 massive saws protruding from the walls. In life, Ryan, you have taken from others, and this room is no different. In front of your mother and your lover are levers. They will manually move the saw across the wall. Once the saw reaches its final destination, the other will be freed. Ryan noticed that each track went from one side to the other of his mother and Jess, through their midsection. "You'll never make me do it," Ryan yelled. "You tend to forget this is my show," the man stated. "If you don't decide quickly, not only will they both die, so will you." Jess started hyperventilating and crying frantically. Ryan's mother, however, was calm, looking at Ryan. "Son, you have a long life ahead of you, and so does she. Make babies, live a full life, and know I'll always love you," she said. Ryan started screaming while crying. "No, I can't! The timer outside stated 1 minute left. Ryan's mom said, "Since your father's disappearance, I have only survived by seeing you become a great man. You inspire me, son. Now go before it's too late." "Time's almost up, Ryan," the voice stated. Both saws started moving towards Ryan's mother and Jess. Ryan quickly ran over to his mother. He gave her a hug and kissed her on the forehead, and then grabbed a hold of the lever just in front of her. His mother seemed sad, but glad that she could see her son one last time. Ryan said, "Look at me, Mom, just look at me." And then he proceeded to push the lever away from the saw and towards his mother. The saw quickly started cutting through her. She yelled as Ryan watched the life drain from her eyes. Jess was screaming. Her saw was getting very close to her abdomen. Ryan pushed harder, blood spewing onto him, his eyes now closed. He kept pushing hard on the lever to end his mother's suffering. He heard the snap of her spinal cord and the lever grew lighter as he passed through her. Jess let out a blood-curdling scream as the saw started piercing her abdomen. Ryan had just finished sawing through his mother as Jess's saw stopped just in time. "Bravo, Ryan," the voice stated. But this time it sounded as if he was in the room with Ryan. He was behind him. He turned around to see the masked man standing at the exit. The lights then flickered off. Ryan bolted towards the masked man, but he felt a needle protrude into his neck from the explosive collar he was wearing. He passed out inches from the masked man. Ryan woke up in the back room of the House of Horrors, bound to a chair once again, but these bindings were leather and built into the chair, unlike his previous metal shackles. In front of him, Jess was bound and gagged. She was unconscious. Ryan yelled, "I played your games. It's over. Let us go." A familiar voice came from behind him. "Hey there. The games have just begun." Ryan's eyes widened. It was his brother, Josh. "What the hell are you doing?" Ryan screamed. Josh yelled, "Shut your mouth. If you know what's good for you. You stole her from me, Ryan. Why would you steal my girlfriend? That night I was ahead of you guys. You both were children, scared about nothing." Ryan replied, "You're a psychopath. We always knew it. Our cat's always going missing. Your numbness." She didn't even like. Ryan was cut short as Josh ran over to Jess and shoved a knife into her thigh. She quickly woke up and screamed, however muffled it was. "Stop!" Ryan yelled. Josh replied, "I thought you knew by now to listen and obey." Josh proceeded to grab a pair of metal shears and snip off Jess's right finger where Ryan's wedding ring sat. Jess moaned but tried to stop herself as she knew it could make things so much worse. Her eyes were wide, staring straight into Ryan's. Ryan had tears rolling down his face and anger building inside of him. To this point, adrenaline had him going, but he could feel his left arm numb from all the damage, and his whole body was aching from all that he endured. "You stole her from me, and Dad protected you." He said, "It's easy to look at other people for your problems, but looking at oneself will always yield fault. And you're the fault, Ryan. That's why I took Dad's fingers and his face." Josh slid the mask he had been wearing to Ryan's feet. It was his father's face, just years old and poorly preserved. Ryan was furious, but knew saying anything would get Jess killed. He looked at Josh with the dirtiest look anyone could ever give. "I thought Dad would be enough, but I had a pain inside of me, Ryan. One that years of holding back just grew." Josh then stabbed another knife into Jess's other thigh. "Kill me, please let her go," Ryan said lightly, hoping this would stop Josh's madness. "Oh brother, you will get your turn. I have been planning this day since we were young. Our first time coming here, I realized that people can appreciate my darkness. People can appreciate pain and suffering. And now I want you to understand my pain." Josh took both knives out of Jess's legs. Blood spurted from the wounds. Jess was close to passing out from the pain and blood loss as Josh violently stabbed Jess in the lower abdomen. Jess's eyes widened once again, but this time all she could do is stare at Ryan in confusion. Ryan screamed, his loss of everything, his father, his mother, the love of his life, and his unborn child. He let out a howl that could only be explained as inhuman. Josh then proceeded to grab the knife in Jess's gut with two hands and raise it up through her abdomen to the top of her torso. Jess's eyes stared at Ryan as her life force faded. Ryan whimpered, "Just end this already, Josh." "On my terms, brother," Josh replied. He then proceeded to wheel over a table full of what could only be explained as torture devices. Just then, they could hear the backstage entrance swing open. It was the police. Someone had tipped them off about a man carrying a vast amount of equipment into the building, as well as hearing a lot of noises coming from the building. Ryan screamed, "In here!" The police started charging towards the backstage room. Josh stated, "You won't get off that easy," as the police started pounding on the door, which had no lock, but Josh had barricaded it with various heavy objects from the room. Every time they bashed, the door opened inch by inch. Josh pulled out a gun and pointed it at Ryan. "Goodbye, brother," he stated. He then proceeded to shoot 2 bullets into Ryan's chest, puncturing his lung and another hitting his mid-chest. Ryan immediately felt searing pain and started choking on his own blood. Josh then proceeded to put the gun under his own chin. "See you in hell, Ryan," he stated as he blew his brains out. Ryan was growing weak and eventually passed out. Weeks later, Ryan woke from a medically induced coma. Nobody was there to see him. Nobody was left. He was alone. He looked to his left and saw a stump where his forearm used to be. A nurse called his lawyer as soon as they realized he was awake. When the lawyer arrived, he explained that Ryan's estate was protected for him. He had inherited his childhood home and his home that he and Jess had. He also had inherited the House of Horrors. His brother had bought it months prior to the incident. Ryan, unable to talk due to months of stasis, shed a tear, remembering all that had happened. Within a few weeks, Ryan was cleared medically and mentally and was released. After his departure, he sold his home and his family's home. Too many memories surrounded those homes and he couldn't take it. After both were sold, he took a cab from his hotel room to the House of Horrors. He entered the back door to see most of what had happened was wiped from that place. All that was left were bloodstains. Ryan started sobbing and walked into the main corridor. He curled up into a ball, crying himself to sleep. Teddy woke up strapped to a chair in a dark room. A screen flashed before his eyes. Standing there was a man wearing a mask with a distorted face on it. "Hello," a robotic voice emitted from the masked man. "You killed your deceased brother's son, Teddy, so you could keep your family's inheritance." Teddy bellowed out, "What are you talking about?" The masked man then proceeded to electrocute Teddy. "Silence. This is my realm. Here you will play by my rules." Teddy quickly shut his mouth and looked at the screen. Teddy noticed the man was tall in stature and was missing his left arm. The man continued, "You take from the world around you, and now it will take from you." A screen then flashed on to Teddy's left. On it was his daughter, surrounded by barbed wire, unable to move and screaming in pain. I hope you enjoyed this story. I enjoyed making it. I'd like to say if you could please follow, subscribe, like, comment, share. It means a lot, especially when I only have so much visibility. When it comes to YouTube, if you don't have a bunch of followers, it does not put you in the algorithm. Facebook's a little bit nicer on that. But I do appreciate anybody who listened on to this point. I do hope you have a great day, and I really hope you enjoyed the story.